My name is Carmela Perillo. I'm a CPA in Aurora, Ontario. That's about 30 or so minutes north of Toronto. I've been an accountant for almost 20 years now. Been working with Amazon sellers pretty closely since January of 2019. So I've kind of moved into the online space, seeing as COVID kind of hit us pretty hard. That's where my focus is going forward on e-commerce.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So since 2019, that's when you started sort of working especially with Amazon sellers, or seeing an uptick in Amazon sellers then?
That's right. Yeah. So I was a seller actually in 2016 for 3 years. I just thought I'd try my hand at that. And well, you know what? I'm not an Amazon seller. I'm an accountant. So I was able to do my books pretty well. So those 3 years I spent really learning sort of the back end of Amazon and what kind of reports I need to pull out in order to properly report my tax. So
and that's awesome, because I think it's so important to have an accountant that understands the process of selling on Amazon. And I get that a lot from people asking me for referrals to accountants that, you know, this is someone that understands our business and understands e-commerce. So you've been there, you've been in the trenches, you understand
I have
what it looks like and how those reports can be confusing to a new seller sometimes as well. So that's something I guess that you can sort of help them navigate through and work with them to extract the data that you need to effectively manage.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, through the process, you know, the question was always, which reports do we need? And so I found myself kind of repeating the instructions. So now we have a nice 1-page instructions on how to get all the reports. So I just send that out and, you know, the rest is easy. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. No, that's awesome. So is it yourself that does a lot of that, or do you also have a team that works with your clients as well? Or
yeah, so I've kind of since 2019 kind of developed a nice team here. So it's myself with an office manager. We have 3 bookkeepers that help our Amazon clients as well as the other clients. And I currently have 2 part-time accounting assistants. So it's growing.
That's good. You've got backup then. That really helps streamline the process, I imagine.
Absolutely. Like you know, the clients may not be dealing with me every day or you know, each time they reach out, because depending on what question or what issues they're having, one of the team members can help. Perfect.
And a question that comes up quite often is, can people use their personal credit card to buy inventory or pay for business expenses? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty much a lot is possible. What it comes down to is how it's being recorded in the books. So when you're dealing with a bookkeeper, it's really important because the bookkeeper is looking at your business bank accounts and your business credit cards. If you're doing transactions outside of those 2 accounts, then the bookkeeper has no clue, right? You need to let them know I do purchases or I pay for expenses on a personal card or through a personal bank account. And at that point, the bookkeeper will say, all right, I need all the information. And it's a specific journal entry that we do, because when you're using personal money to pay for business expenses, you ultimately want to get reimbursed, right? So if you don't post it, not only do you not get the deduction, you also don't get reimbursed.
Which is kind of important. So that's good to know. So you can help sellers that are starting out using those personal credit cards to track that in an official way that the CRA will accept, and also make sure, more importantly, they're getting reimbursed for those expenses and not just eating that cost or forgetting about those costs and not getting reimbursed where they could be, right? So that's really helpful. You know, and on that note, a lot of sellers, when they start out, they ask, I think a lot of them start out as sole proprietors. Some people incorporate, but they say, how do they pay themselves from the business? And what's your thoughts on that for someone?
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of confusion. So when you're a sole proprietorship, you can't put yourself on payroll, right? That's just not allowed. So really, you don't pay yourself. basically what, at the end of the day, when you got your expenses, deduct from your income, whatever profit or loss you're left with, that's technically your pay.
Right.
That's what you get taxed on, right? If you're a corporation, then you have some more flexibility there, right? You can pay yourself with, as a salary or dividends or a little bit of both. The amount or, how you pay yourself really is dependent on your personal tax situation. It also has to do, you have to take into consideration, are you going to be looking for a mortgage or a loan, in the next year or two? So you want to pre-plan for that, right? Because banks will not look at dividends as earned income. It's not considered earned income. So, you're not going to qualify for that mortgage. So that's something that you really should speak with your accountant and not wait till, oh, I'm about to buy a house this month. Yeah. What can we do, right?
Totally. That's good to know. And I ran into that initially when I started my corporation, where they'd look at that. So banks now, I've found they're getting a little better at looking at those dividends and counting it, and then they want to see all your financials in the business as well.
Right.
But like you said, if you're doing the dividend thing, or you're keeping money in your corp to avoid taxes, so you're reinvesting that money in inventory, let's say, planning ahead, like you said, talking to an accountant makes all the difference, because if a person's planning on buying a house in the next year or two, it may be advantageous to boost their income prior so they qualify for that mortgage, as opposed to,
right.
So even though they're paying more tax up front, there's a strategy involved, which if you have the full picture, that's something that you could be really valuable in advising someone on moving forward with that strategy and how they should pay themselves. That's that. I think that in itself could save someone a lot of heartache, knowing that and planning.
Yeah, because we can't really do anything retro, right?
No.
Once it's on there, people think by dating things retroactively that it would work.
No, so the bank need that information. So that's actually a really good point, because we all have expenses. We might need to buy a loan, or we might need to refinance. And if we think that's coming up, paying ourselves or having the right strategy can be the difference between being able to get that loan or that new house, or being denied by the bank. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
And, we get a lot of people asking questions in the group, and that's why I always advise them. I can't give you a one-line answer on this because I don't know your full financial picture and your goals. And that's why I think it's so valuable. You work with a CPA on an ongoing basis, so there's a full picture there. So that's great to know. Sort of related to that, and I get this question asked a lot in the group, and I kind of shudder, but a lot of people either have jumped into it and opened an LLC in the US, and they say, is this something I should do? What's your opinion on that? I have my thoughts, but I'll see what your opinion is.
Yeah, so I know I have some clients that, they've taken courses that were offered by US companies or US coaches, and they do push the LLC. Now, the trouble with that is the CRA views an LLC similar to a sole proprietorship. So because Canada requires the Canadian resident to report their worldwide sales, they're going to have to report the income earned in that LLC on their personal tax return, right? And it's possible that they'll get taxed twice. Okay. So what I do, I advise them to speak to a specialist in that area, because I don't do any US tax filings.
No.
What I do is I work closely with a cross-border specialist here in Toronto, and that way my clients get the best of both worlds. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's good to know. I mean, because like you say, there's a lot more implications involved with that, and I think sometimes people find something's easy to set up, but it can be very difficult to unwind and expensive to unwind as well.
That's right.
As you said, there could be that double taxation. So that's I've got my thoughts on it. It's kind of on the lines of what I'd learned as well when I did the research in it. And I'd actually helped, there's other courses I promote, and I've helped some of the creators of that course when they're advising Canadians to get advice from a CPA, because it doesn't necessarily apply to them. And they don't know that as course creators, because they don't know our Canadian laws and rules. So I think that's really important for people to understand that before they jump the gun.
Yeah.
And so basically, then, if someone's starting out on Amazon, would you recommend that they start as a sole proprietor, or would you recommend that they try to incorporate from the get-go? What's your thoughts there?
So first, I would ask, how serious are they in giving this business a go, right? Because if you're just going to dabble and see what's going to happen, I would say just start as a sole proprietor, because one, it's easier, it's cheaper to start, right? And, because if you have a corporation, if you start off as that, your first year, you're going to pay an accountant, over $1,000 just to do your tax return.
Yeah.
Right. Even if you have zero income, right? So I would first take a look at, am I really going to put 110% into this, or is it just, I'm curious, right?
That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah, because if someone's just dabbling, testing the waters, like you say, there's the initial compliance cost. They could maybe they go alone and incorporate. Usually, I know lawyers don't recommend that. You just hire a lawyer to do it for you and set up. So there's a setup for that. And then, like you say, the accounting costs and the requirements on that can be expensive. So that's a great way of looking at it. I think just, I've always told people, like, take the path of least resistance at first and test and then adapt, but as long as they know the implications, right? And that's why I think, I always tell people, talk to professionals first before you make any big decisions, because while it can be easy to set up, it might cause you some more heartache down the road if you go the wrong way or you change your mind, right? To unwind that. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you also have to take into account what their personal tax situation is already. So if someone's in a higher tax bracket, and the sole proprietorship takes off, well, then you're adding income to your personal tax return, and you could be bumping yourself up to the next tax bracket, right?
That's a great point. And that's so important, because I always tell people with the Amazon world, you want to scale your business and reinvest those profits. So if you're incorporated, let's say they're a small corp in the first year, but like most of us are, I think under 500,000, there's preferential lower corporate tax rates in Canada. So they can reinvest that money in inventory and avoid paying personal income tax rates that would eat into that growth. And then that compounding by reinvesting those profits could really pay off for someone, as you said, if they're serious, by going to the trouble of setting up the corporation and keeping that money separately that way, right?
Yeah, that's a big consideration. The tax rates are so much more favorable for corporations.
Yeah, and I think it sort of switched a few years ago. I know there was some changes in the tax code, and it seemed like the strategy was to tax income higher and give small business owners a few breaks. So it seems like it's definitely more strategic if you're keeping the money and legitimately and reinvested in your business, then that makes a lot more sense to grow it. So, and on that note, is sales tax registration required for people who are selling in Canada? What are your thoughts there?
So there's been lots of changes in the last year. Well, with Amazon now, collecting and remitting the GST, HST for sellers, new sellers anyway, because one thing to understand is if you've already registered for GST, HST, then you have to continue to collect and remit it to CRA. So it's only for these new sellers that come on board does Amazon have to collect and remit on their behalf. So it's good for the new sellers.
So if they're brand new and they haven't sold anything, and they don't have any experience selling yet or any sales history, and they haven't registered, Amazon will collect that for them. And then is there like a limit? Like if they hit a certain amount, is there a point where they have to then register for a GST number, or?
No. So if you're going to go under that new, I guess it's the marketplace facilitator rules, then Amazon is going to take care of that for you.
Perfect.
You just sell and reap the benefits of that.
All
So you
right.
don't have the headache of the sales tax filings for the GST, HST.
Right, right.
They have to keep in mind, though, that they also don't get to claim any input tax credits on expenses,
Oh,
right?
yeah. So registering at some point, again, if they're serious, could be beneficial because if they're
It could be.
paying GST or HST on inventory, they could claim that back at the end of the year when they file their returns.
Yeah, especially if they're buying here in Canada and selling in the States, right?
Right, to
Because there's
Americans,
no
because there's no,
HST being collected.
gotcha.
So that means all these all the sales tax, the GST they've been paying out will come back
Yep.
to them as a refund. So again, you got to take a look at the specific situation and see what is more beneficial for them.
And I can relate
Right.
to that because in my first year registering for GST, I was primarily selling in the US, and it was that same
Mhm.
scenario where I was paying HST or GST on inventory and selling it pretty much all to Americans and collecting
Yeah.
no GST back. So I was able to claim all of that back, which if I hadn't, that would have really eaten into my bottom line at the end of the year if I hadn't had that. So again, I
Yeah.
think it's a good example of where someone can work with you and share their future growth plans, and then you can
Right.
advise them if it makes sense to register or not based on how things are going, right? So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
really important to know. And then once they work with you, like what kind of documents at year end are required in order to prepare their tax return? Like what do you need from the sellers?
So what I do is, first of all, I give them that instruction sheet,
Mhm.
and that way they can provide the proper reports. And it's not, well, at least that's what I don't do. I don't just take the information and pop it into a tax return and off you go, right?
Right,
Because
right.
anybody can do that, honestly.
Yeah.
So I do, I discuss ahead of time with the client, what their objectives are for the following year. There's some questions always about, big purchases that they've made, like computers, maybe some equipment. So we have to ensure that we're properly reporting that. And I always like to ensure that we agree to what the sales are in Amazon. There could be, we have to report on an accrual method, right? So that's important. So if your payout, like a lot of people will report based on payout statements, which
Right.
doesn't give you the January 1st to December 31st picture, because there's always an overlap of periods at the beginning and at the end,
I
right?
remember that you have to account for unsold inventory at year end and things like that, right? So that's
Yeah, so
yeah.
there's lots of discussion. So my clients, they should be prepared to, be asked questions, but
Mhm.
also to have their questions answered, right?
Perfect.
So, yeah.
And I think that's a great way of approaching it, because a lot of people, they don't know where to start. So you have the quick
Yeah.
sheet of where to go and get the reports, and you kind of guide them what
Yeah.
to look out for. And then a lot of people ask when they start their business and they've got all the reports and they know where to input that information, they start wondering what types of deductions do they qualify for in their business.
Mhm.
To minimize taxes, obviously, at the end of the year. I mean, tax evasion is illegal, but tax avoidance is all
Yes.
right. So if there's legitimate deductions that we can claim, then I think
Yeah.
working with yourself would really make it easier for sellers to make sure they're maximizing those. So what sort of typical things do you look at for Amazon sellers to deduct?
So with Amazon sellers specifically, of course, we've got the hefty Amazon fees, right? The
Mhm.
advertising fees, shipping fees. If you're bringing in product, you have your brokerage fees, right? Customs, duties. Obviously, your purchases, right?
Yep.
Your inventory purchases. And then, your office expenses, some supplies, insurance, telephone. But there are, a couple of things like your vehicle that you can expense if you're using, let's say, retail or online arbitrage where you're picking product up. And again, on the vehicle expense side, a mileage log is an absolute must. That's the first thing that CRA will ask you for. right? It's not a
Right.
should I or shouldn't I? It's yes, you must.
Have that. I think there's even some tools and apps now that do it automatically. Or like, I think
Yeah.
I forgot to ask actually, what software do you recommend people use to keep track of everything?
So we use QuickBooks Online for, let's say, 90-ish% of my clients.
Right.
Some of them are on Wave accounting because it's a free cloud base. So,
Oh yeah.
for the smaller businesses. And I know with QuickBooks Online, there is a mileage tracker, right? You can have it right on your
Yeah.
phone.
Which
Yeah.
makes it easy.
And there's
Just
also something called Mile IQ.
mileage. Okay. And as far as tracking mileage, like I guess I know when I started, I went through a few different scenarios. When I incorporated and I started doing less arbitrage, they recommended there's a per kilometer charge. You can reimburse yourself from the corp rather than deducting all the other insurance costs for your car. And that if you're not using it as regularly, I guess it makes more sense. So
Yeah. So
there's
you
probably a
just
limit
basically,
or
you basically track whatever mileage were related to business. Still, I would keep a log of that and then just
right.
multiply it by the rate that CRA prescribes for that year. Every year it kind of inches up a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess with inflation now, maybe they'll adjust it a bit more. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
And another question I had, just a basic one. Do you help people keep track if they're selling in the US of currencies and that sort of thing? So when they're doing their tax filing, figuring out the exchange rates or gains or losses potentially if they have a US bank account, is that important to track as well? Or
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a must because when we reconcile the bank account, even like within your whatever software you're using, if you're using QuickBooks Online and you've sort of turned on that FX feature, QuickBooks will kind of translate it at, let's say, December 31st, but we need to make sure that that translation is correct for that day and time. So on December 31st, what is the value of the money that's in your US account? So yeah,
right.
I clearly look at those things for them because your income has to, be translated as well, and your expenses. So
And
yeah.
I think QuickBooks is one of the ones that handled that reasonably well with whereas some other accounting platforms weren't quite as easy to manage multiple currencies, right? So is that one of the reasons you prefer QuickBooks for that? It just makes it a bit simpler? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I've been using QuickBooks way before it was online. Probably more than 20 years now.
Oh yeah.
So I know it very, very well. And I do like the way it handles the foreign exchange. I'm not sure how the other programs handle it. I don't have experience with Zero and Wave. I mean, I've downloaded reports, but I haven't really worked with it.
Yeah, I tried Zero and it was just so unintuitive that I gave up on it and went to QuickBooks early on. There were a lot of people pushing Zero at one point. I'm not sure the rationale behind that, but yeah, like I said, I think for the average seller, in my opinion, anyway, I've always found QuickBooks just to be simple, or like you say, Wave, because it's free when you're first starting out.
Yeah.
It's a step up. It's better than using Excel spreadsheets. I know I was guilty of that in my first year. I had all these receipts and digital receipts and an Excel saying, I bought this inventory. Oh, I sold this one, and just did it all manually. And man, when I switched to QuickBooks, rather than pay a bookkeeper at the time, I had like a year's worth of transactions and I had to go back and do all that manually. So I spent like 2 weeks doing that, which wasn't a good use of my time. But I think it's valuable for sellers if they're serious about Amazon to get a system in place sooner than later, because it saves you so much headaches to start a process and stick with it than try and undo things that you've already done. It's like 10 times more expensive and time consuming, it seems, going backwards.
It's really true. I mean, I totally understand, trying to minimize costs at the start. But it could end up costing a lot more at the end. Because I've had to go through and redo reconciliations and that just takes hours that nobody wants to spend hours fixing things. right?
And especially a lot of newer sellers tend to panic at tax time and need the help right at the busiest time of the year. So,
That's the other thing, you know, I try, and I actually, even now that we're at the end of November, I'm starting to get on my clients to come in, you know, let's start looking at your stuff. Is there tax planning that we have to do, right?
totally.
Because if you catch me in March, April, May of next year, I'm at the busiest, and you know,
Yeah.
we may not have the amount of time that you need. Right
Right.
now, I will spend whatever time is required. But you
And
know,
that's good to know. I mean, and to get in with you early, they've got a system in place. So periodically they could check in and make sure things are going the way they should be going. And then there's a lot less possibly undoing or questions come tax time when all the deadlines start
well,
to
and
hit.
less stress, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
which is always good.
I find that everybody is completely stressed about tax. And so if we plan ahead, I guarantee you that stress will go away.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. No, I'm a big proponent of that. Planning ahead. Sometimes as entrepreneurs, we sort of want to go gung ho and jump in, and that's fine to a degree. But I think when it comes to your bookkeeping, it takes a little bit of time up front, but it saves so much time and stress down the road that it's just worth investing that time to do it properly
Very.
for someone who's seriously looking at growing this, right? Even into a few
Mhm.
$1,000s a month, it's still worth tracking all of that and doing it properly. So, no,
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, that's kind of all the questions I have and what people seem to ask quite commonly in the group. And I think it's great that you've got the experience you do. You're sort of a unicorn in this world, and that there aren't a lot of people that the Amazon experience and understand what we do. For whatever reason, there's a lot of CPAs just look at us like we're aliens and nope, sorry, I can't help you. I don't understand e-commerce, you know. And it may be that it's just, you know, it's too much. They look at it and think it's just too much work, maybe in some cases for some sellers, but
Well, it's
overall.
possible maybe spending the time and the resources learning how it works, right?
Perfect. So, I
But
mean, if someone wants to get in touch and figure out what they need to do and how they would go about working with you, what's your typical process for that for onboarding a client?
well, so I do offer 30-minute consults for free. So
Perfect.
if anybody wants to reach out and, you know, email, I know I'm on Facebook a lot and people will message me through Facebook. That works too. Although email is right there in front of me, I won't miss the email. And we will chat for 30 minutes, see what you need, kind of get you on the right path. And
Perfect.
if they choose to work with me and my team, then Mariana, who is our office manager, she will get in touch and get all the preliminary engagement letter and contact forms sent.
Perfect. And at the end of this video, I'll put your contact information on there so people can reach out and schedule that with you. And then the other thing I should just mention just came to mind, it's quite important. A lot of people ask me for an accountant that's close by them. And I always tell people, well, you don't need to have someone right next door to you, because I think you do
Yeah,
pretty much all of this online. So it doesn't matter that you're in Toronto area, but it doesn't really matter if
that's right.
someone's in Toronto or Alberta, it's all online. So they don't need to have an accountant like next door that they're physically going and seeing, right?
Exactly. So the one thing that, well, I guess it doesn't matter to the client, but you know, although we're all CPAs and we're, you know, we can work across Canada, we do have to be designated or licensed in each province, right? So yeah. So right now I have a lot of clients out in the West.
Perfect. So you
It
can
just
help
happened
clients,
that way.
you can help clients across Canada though, no issue, and that they
Yeah,
can work with you on that, and you can help them out either, I guess, with Zoom or over the phone or online through their
exactly.
QuickBooks account. Like I think you can give your accountant login access to QuickBooks, so you could go in
Yeah,
and see all
it's the
that data.
best thing. The
Yeah,
best thing, because what I usually will do is do an initial review and then provide feedback as to what things could be tweaked, what has to be changed, and what is, you know, good to go.
beautiful. And you know, the other thing I like about using an online platform like QuickBooks is everything's in the cloud. So if my house burns down or my computer
Yeah.
gets lost, I'm not lost, I'm not out all those receipts. You know, in the old days, people had shoe boxes
Yeah.
full of receipts, and if they're gone, you've got no proof. So it's in the cloud. So it's an extra level of security, and an assurance, I guess, that if anything happened locally to you, your data is still safe with QuickBooks,
Yep.
right? So that's a big
Absolutely.
advantage. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to introduce yourself. And we're
No.
really happy to have someone with your expertise that understands the Amazon sellers world, especially as Canadians. And like I said, there's very few people that have that level of knowledge. And so I'm looking forward to being able to refer people over to you and
Thank you.
and have them set off on the right foot, because I'm a big believer, like you are, that it makes just life so much easier to plan properly ahead of time and set things up the
does.
right way, and also boost your bottom line, which is what we're looking to do as an entrepreneur. If you can deduct things you didn't know you could deduct, that's extra profit in the entrepreneur's pocket. So why not, you know? And
Yeah.
my advice has always been, experts like yourself are worth their weight in gold, because whatever fees you charge, you know, with the deductions and all, doing the following the rules, there's a very good potential you're going to save a lot more money doing things properly than trying to go it alone, especially if you make mistakes
Yeah.
and go and undo those mistakes by not.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, it can be quite daunting in the beginning. And I know online there's lots of resources, lots of material to read through. Sometimes it's not that easy to kind of untangle everything and understand it completely. So yeah, you know, I don't mind helping people to understand what they're looking at, right? It's not just numbers on a page or a tax return. You need to understand what it all means.
Totally. Yep. And have an expert kind of decipher that sometimes, because it can be
Sometimes.
intimidating to the average layperson.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for your time. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate that. And
No
looking
problem.
forward to referring people over that you can work with and help out.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye
Bye.
now.
Bye.